Okay, so it's 4 o'clock, time for some Foreman and Ansible. I guess no one else is coming. If I'm doing my math right, we have 11 people in here, which is a nice and cozy group. So let's get straight into it. It seems to be the custom for the presenter to speak about themselves first, so I have to oblige. My name is Ruzicka. I'm a Ruzicka on most platforms, so that would be Matrix, that would be our community forum, that would be email if you're into that. The only exception is GitHub, where I use my full name because someone beat me to it. So there we go. We have to play the cards that we were given, I guess. I've been working on Foreman for the last 10 years, give or take. And I'm mostly focused on remote execution and the tasking system and the sort of low-level stuff around that. That's me. Now let us talk about you. I was hoping I could get a show of hands. Who uses Foreman? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Who uses Ansible? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, that's interesting. Who uses Foreman and Ansible together? 1, 2, 3. Maybe we'll change something about that. Is it? What does that mean?
The stabilization is not working well. Look.
What the hell? Oh, that's on record. Okay. So if I could ask you to turn it off and on again, and maybe it will solve itself. And I'll just continue. Worst case, there won't be any video of me, which will happens. Okay, let's continue talking about you for a little bit more. We had 5 people using Foreman. Are you using remote execution? 1, 2, 3. Okay. Are you using the pull mode in remote execution? 1.5.
For some environments.
For some environments. Okay, that's cool. And now the biggest question related to this talk: who would want pull mode for Ansible? 1, 2, 3, 4. Excellent. All right, so let's get cracking. This talk will completely revolve around the pull mode and Ansible. I hope you'll appreciate the play of words I made in the title of the talk. But we'll go through some history, how we got where we are. I always like to do that, some code archaeology and so on. We'll talk about how the pull mode works. We've had a few people using it, but not everyone. So let's take a look at how it actually works. We'll talk about the wild idea that I had. There will be a demo, hopefully, if the demo gods allow us. Actually, I've already had a mild heart attack related to the demo when I opened the laptop from suspend in the morning and found out I had no network connectivity to the VMs and stuff. But it should be all good right now. So we'll see. As I said, the idea is sort of on the wild side. So we'll take a look if there could be a more sophisticated approach how we could make this work. And there will be, hopefully, again, yet another demo of the hopefully more sensible approach. I must say a disclaimer first. This is entirely based on a proof of concept I made, and not everything works in there. There are some things which already do work, there are some things which could be made to work. And there are some things which definitely don't work and won't ever work by definition. Then I will again have some questions for you about whether the things that could be made to work are actually important. If no one needs them, then why bother, I guess. But we'll see, and then we'll have a little bit more traditional Q&A where you'll ask me some questions, or you can. And just because there's a Q&A at the end, that doesn't mean you can't just ask things straight away. If anything is unclear or whatever, just holler and we'll take a look at that. So, starting with the history. I had to go sort of deep on this one. I was looking primarily at remote execution and Ansible. And there was one interesting thing that I found out. Both Foreman remote execution and Foreman Ansible plugins had their first commit in 2015. Ansible had its first commit in October, I think, while remote execution in April. But the interesting thing is that Foreman Ansible appeared in our repositories first. And it was in Foreman 1.8. That's been a while. Remote execution, or Foreman remote execution, followed shortly after in Foreman 1.9. And then there was this large-ish gap into Foreman 1.16, where Foreman Ansible was turned to be a remote execution provider using the provider framework that is there in remote execution. In Foreman 1.22, we added support for using Ansible Runner. So up until Foreman 1.22, when you used Ansible, we would launch a separate Ansible playbook process for each of the hosts, which did sort of work, but didn't scale well. My favorite story about this is that I kicked off a single job on 300 hosts, and it spawned 300 Ansible playbooks on my machine. The load on that machine, on that poor 8-core machine, went to low hundreds. And there was no way of recovering that. I just had to kill the machine and start it again. So that wasn't great. With Ansible Runner, we are spawning one process per a batch of hosts, which by default is set to 100, which helps with the load, but it's always a trade-off. So there's less load, but it increased the latency because now the run is batched and the hosts are waiting for each other, and it may appear that it's slower than it used to be. Then we completely skipped major changes in the Foreman 2 line for some reason. But in Foreman 3.1, we introduced the pull mode for remote execution. The thing about this is that it was, and it still is, only for the script provider. So no Ansible in there. If you enable the pull mode, but then run Ansible, it will still try to connect to the host over SSH. Now, let's talk about changing that, maybe. As I said, because not everyone in here used the pull mode, let's talk about how it works. These slides are actually taken from the introductory session that I had on our community demo. Back then, we were rolling the pull provider out for the first time. So let's start on the Foreman side because it's the easiest one to grasp. Because from the user's point of view, everything should just work the same way. To put it another way, it should just work. If it doesn't, please come talk to me after the talk. As I said, the pull mode is only applicable to script provider jobs. And to be extra clear, Ansible always uses SSH. There's this gotcha about the Ansible connection variable that you can set to something, and then Ansible will try to use a different connection mechanism to connect to the remote host. But that's purely Ansible thing. That's not us in any way. Hello. Okay, on the proxy side, this is where it starts getting a little bit interesting. You can enable, or you can change the mode on a proxy. That's the granularity at which it operates. So you could go to your proxy and do something like Foreman installer, Foreman remote execution script mode equals pool-mgmt. And you hit that, it runs for a while. Eventually it finishes and it's all set up. So that's the configured part of it. In case it's not obvious, I'll mention that explicitly. Foreman doesn't know. Foreman doesn't know about which mode is used between the proxy and the host. In a way, that's nice because then there are no conditions on the server side. It all looks the same on surface, but it gets tricky at a different level. So if you run this installer command to configure the proxy to use the pool mode, then the proxy runs a MQTT broker. You can think about that as a message bus. Maybe it's not 100% accurate, but for the general picture. The proxy runs a MQTT broker. Right? The hosts connect to that MQTT broker. So the initial connection is made from the host to the proxy, while in push mode, it's made from the proxy to the host. So the initiation is reversed. And once that connection is established, data can flow freely both ways. So proxy runs the broker. When it receives a job from Foreman, it stores it. It notifies the target host over MQTT. It assumes that the host is online at the time. If the host is not online, the job won't get picked up, right? Because the host is never notified. But the proxy tries notifying the host periodically. I think the default is every 15 minutes. So in theory, you can use this to manage hosts which only come online every now and then. You just schedule the jobs. And if they're online for at least 15 minutes, they should get the job. If you boot the machine and turn it off after 10 minutes, it might be a little bit tricky because of how the timing would or would not align. The proxy waits for the host to pick the job up. When the host picks the job up and starts running it, it sends the updates back to the proxy, so the proxy receives the updates, and then it eventually finishes. The proxy takes all the outputs that it accumulated and sends that back to Foreman. On the client side, there is a new moving piece. It's called Yggdrasil. It's a client piece which runs on that machine. It connects to the MQTT broker. Then Yggdrasil also runs our own worker. Yggdrasil on its own doesn't actually perform any actions on the machine. It just handles the network traffic. So Yggdrasil runs our own worker to actually do the execution. It connects to MQTT and listens for messages. When it receives a message from the smart proxy, it calls to the smart proxy over HTTPS. It downloads the thing to run and passes it to the worker. When the worker receives the message, it writes, here I say the script, because it usually is a script. When it receives the message with the script, it writes it to a file, sets the executable bit on it, and executes it. And as the thing runs, the worker collects the outputs and sends them to the proxy. Right. I'll leave the previous slide on for a little bit because there's a hint in here. And that is this line. It writes the script to a file and sets the executable bit on it. I don't know if it's just me, but it feels like I talk about this particular functionality every single time I'm giving a talk on remote execution. And that is, it seems that most people are using remote execution just to run shell scripts, which is fine. But what we can do is we can set the shebang, right? So you can do hashtag !user/bin/Python, and you can write the rest in Python, and you can have remote execution run Python directly. So we have a client that actually can execute anything, like anything at all, as long as the host has an interpreter for it. That got me thinking, isn't Ansible just an interpreter? So, ladies and gentlemen, with great pleasure, I present to you executable YAML. So there's a bit of magic going on top. I had to put the env-s in there to have it actually split the commands and arguments and stuff. But this is what we can do. We can set Ansible Playbook as the interpreter for the file. We use the local connection so that it doesn't make any network connections and just runs things locally. We need to provide some sort of a inventory for Ansible to run on, but localhost is fine for some use cases. So that's what I did here. It might seem a little bit far-fetched at first, but let me switch to my demo Foreman instance, and we'll see that it actually works. So here's my Foreman. It's really just a testing instance. There's not too much data in there, but let's roll with it. What I want to point out in here is that I'm essentially using the script provider. I'm not specifically saying Ansible in here because in the end, it's a script. It's not a native playbook. In here, you can see that I have the, let me make that bigger. No, doesn't work. Okay, so the UI broke up a little bit by squishing that. Okay, so there's the shebang on the first line. They're doing user bin environment -s Ansible playbook, local connection, localhost as the only host in the inventory, and then I just do hosts all and a debug module with message hello. I can skip the rest, and I just run it, and we can see it's done, and it was nearly instant. So if we take a look at the output, we can see it just went through Ansible and it got executed. So I'm afraid I'm lazy by nature, and I'm always looking for the simplest possible way I could do. So I was thinking, okay, this seems to work. This is cool. We could just we could just change all the Ansible templates that we ship, just include the shebang in there, and that would be it. If it would be used through push, then anything that starts with a hashtag is a comment in YAML, so it would get ignored. If it would be used with pull mode, it would work as well, because then it would be honored. Of course, it's not as simple, because when you run Ansible through push, you actually get a lot more data inside the run that comes from Foreman. And by doing this, you wouldn't really get any of that. I guess we could expand on the shebang trick, but I'm pretty sure there's a limit on how long that can be. And we are already giving a lot of stuff in there, so I'd be worried it would break sooner than later. But I was sort of pleased with this. I'll go back in a few slides, because it was nice and simple. If I were to approach this another way, maybe you could say the right way, then I would probably think about this. Okay, so we have our own worker which runs scripts. So we would either have to put together a new worker or change the worker we have to be able to accept quote unquote native Ansible inputs, and then be able to run that specific job a different way. As I said, I'm a little bit lazy. The current worker that we have is written in Go, and there's a lot of error handling boilerplate, I guess. So I was looking for a way how we could avoid that. So I tried building up on the shebang idea to figure out if there was a way how we could bypass the limitations that are currently there. By the way, this means that if anyone really needs this, they can use this trick to run Ansible through pull mode starting with Foreman 3.1, in case anyone needs this. So I thought, what would be a more sophisticated approach that would be based on the same idea? As I said, we could just patch all the templates that we ship to include the shebang, but that wouldn't really solve it for people who have their own job templates. And I mean, we could force them to edit in there themselves, but that's not really, or that wouldn't be a nice user experience. So what if we could have the smart proxy wrap the thing it gets into a script that would execute the playbook locally? So we are moving one level above, below, somewhere. We're moving to a sort of different level, because the proxy knows in which mode it's running. So if it would get an Ansible job to run on the host and it knew that it's running in pull mode, it could just somehow turn the playbook into the thing to execute, so that the client wouldn't have to know what it actually is. Right. So it would wrap the playbook, and then it would go to the client, and the client would just execute it without knowing what it is or caring what it is. That's probably the more important part. So yes, the next slide says yet another demo, because I put together a proof of concept of this thing. And I said earlier that I was trying to find the smallest possible way. So the initial proof of concept for this was a 35-line change, which isn't much. If I were to change the worker, it would be 350 at least. So let me switch to my Foreman again. And let's try run. Oh, no. Let's try running something else. So let's do schedule a job. And in here, we'll do Ansible playbook. It's so tiny, sorry. And you'll get a chance to see how I really am not good at typing when people are watching. But let's do hosts all, tasks, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And maybe it will shout at me that I, did my indentation wrong. But let's try message hello. And I click run. And it succeeded again. And if I look at it, the output should be pretty much the same to what we got before. So there we go. And this is using the same trick. The trick just happens at a different time and at a different place. So, oops. Why is it small? Was it small before? Ah. Sometimes we just have to do things twice, I guess. Okay, so what would work if we went down this road? What would work? I would say the essentials would work. So anything you're used to from script pull mode would just continue working transparently. That means that running should work, canceling should work, live output should work. If I ran something that would take longer, we could see live how it rolls. Effective user changing should also work. There would be a certain class of bugs which wouldn't be really possible anymore. So, as I said, with push, we run a single Ansible runner playbook for a bunch of hosts, and then we sort of try to pick apart what we get from Ansible and match it to individual hosts. It's not 100% reliable. This would just disappear because we no longer would run, one process for many hosts. It would always be one Ansible for one host, and that Ansible would be running on the host directly. It would also help with some dependency issues. Like certain versions of Ansible require certain versions of Python, both on the controller node, or however to call it, as well as on the managed host. So that would disappear, right? You run Ansible on the host that is being managed. And once Ansible is installed on that host, you have some sort of a guarantee that it will work. So certain class of issues would just disappear. Of course, we would get new ones. Everything is a trade-off, I guess. So what would definitely not work? And that is orchestration. You can use Ansible to orchestrate stuff, but then it relies on having a single Ansible runner, playbook, whatever, against multiple hosts at once. We sort of do run one, with push, we run one Ansible runner per group of hosts. So to a certain degree, you can orchestrate stuff within that group. Ansible can do that like natively. The catch with Foreman is that it's sort of unpredictable which hosts end up being bundled together in a group, which makes me believe this wouldn't be that big of a deal, since it's not really reliably usable nowadays. But feel free to tell me that I'm wrong. I'd be more than happy for that. Actually, any feedback is good feedback. So this definitely wouldn't work. There's just no way. I mean, each host would run its own Ansible, and I don't really like the idea of having multiple Ansibles running on multiple machines communicate with each other. So please no, please no. Right, with pool, the orchestration idea just doesn't fly at all. On the flip side, it would sort of get us to the previous state before we had Ansible runner, because we would again be in the situation where each host would be running its own Ansible, so they wouldn't block each other, and things would appear fast again, hopefully.
But is Ansible runner not the same as when I execute Ansible playbook? It calls the Ansible runner and it will be executed on the right node, right?
To be honest, I'm not sure if Ansible Playbook executes Ansible runner internally. That I'm not familiar with. I know that Ansible runner runs Ansible Playbook under the hood, so it's the other way around, I guess. It would be weird if runner executed Playbook and then Playbook executed runner. That would be odd, but
I don't use Ansible runner. That's why I asked the question.
Right.
Because I don't know Ansible runner yet.
Right. So from what I remember, because again, it was a while ago, Ansible runner was supposed to be like a more stable interface to Ansible Playbook. Or at least that's my idea about it. I'm not sure how well it correlates with reality, but this idea served me reasonably well in the past, I guess. Right. So it would more or less get us to the previous situation. Things would appear fast again, which would be great. Now, what you've seen is using the more sophisticated way where the job reaches the smart proxy adds the shebang or wraps it in a script. Then inside the script, we pull out all the inputs, well, almost all the inputs that we know. So we pull out the playbook, we pull in the parameters and stuff like that. We convert them into files that could be consumed by Ansible. We wrap that in a script, then, which when it runs, it spits out all these things into files, and that then points Ansible at them. That's really how it works under the hood. Now, the amount of stuff I currently handle in there this way is relatively small. Those are the direct things. So those are the job inputs that you pass in Foreman. Those are the parameters that Foreman knows, some metadata and stuff like that. but it's currently missing roles, connections, and all that stuff. So the way it works with push mode Ansible in Foreman is that on your smart proxy, you do, I don't know, Ansible Galaxy install ansible.posix, for example, and that makes the role or connection or collection or whatever it is available on the file system of that smart proxy. Then you can import that role into Foreman, but Foreman doesn't import the role itself. It imports metadata about the role. So you see defaults as Ansible variables. You can override them. There's some typing. Like you can see that this is a string, this is a Boolean, and you can change them. But the roles themselves live on the smart proxy. When you then execute the job, the proxy sort of assumes that the actual content is in there and just uses what it finds on the file system. If you have multiple proxies, then it's currently up to you as the users to ensure that all the content is available on all the proxies that could be used. That's a little bit unfortunate. I mean, it's probably doable when you have 1, 2, 3, maybe 5 proxies. Then it's not nice, but I guess one can live with that. Now, imagine having to do that on every single host you have in case you want to run the roles on them. So that's currently not there. If I'm just making things up as I go, we could use the similar approach, and when the script is being built on the smart proxy side, it would just collect the roles and stuff and make a, I don't know, tarball out of that and embed that into the script, and then on the client extract it and run it from there. But it's getting a bit convoluted to my taste. So that will actually be one of my questions at the end. That is, how many people actually use the import roles, assign them to host, and then apply them, and how important that would be. But we'll get back to that. So to recap what I said, these contents, these things are available on the smart proxy on the file system. And we would have to invent some sort of a mechanism how we could get all that stuff. I know I'm misusing the word a lot or using it a lot, but we would have to figure that out somehow. The other thing that would not work would be the config report callback. In Foreman, when you assign roles to your host and then do apply all roles, you should get a config report created out of that run. So the way it works, it goes to the smart proxy runs Ansible, and then there's a Ansible plugin, I think is the right word. There is a Ansible plugin which collects some sort of a statistics about the run, and when the run finishes, it calls back to Foreman. And this is the important part, it calls back to Foreman directly. And then in Foreman, you get the configuration report, and you can see that, I don't know, 25 things changed. In push mode, this works, right? The Ansible and therefore the plugin runs on the smart proxy. The smart proxy is sort of required to have a direct visibility to Foreman. The plugin can also use the certificates that the smart proxy uses. And so we deal with, transferring the data over the network, authentication, all that things. We just use certificates, the visibility is there, so it just works out of the box. The thing with pool is that Ansible would run on the client machines, not on the smart proxy. So the visibility would be a problem. There's no requirement that the hosts would have to see Foreman itself. Right? So even if we did configure the client to do the callback on their own, then the visibility would be a problem. Or the smart proxy would act as a proxy. It's in the name, so it could do that. So that would be an option. If we kept the way that the client calls to Foreman or would call to Foreman directly, then certificates would be a problem because the host may not have a certificate that would be accepted or trusted by Foreman itself.
Pull mode, there is also the requirement for Catalog's host to do this. We have certificates.
In theory, you should be able any sort of certificates. You should be able to use remote execution in pull mode without catalog and without entitlement certificates, but we don't really hold your hand. It's really up to you to get the certs and put them in the right places. Yeah. But it's true that it could be considered an unwritten requirement. So, yeah. We could dig the hole a little bit deeper and keep relying on that. The question is if we want to do that. Right. So that was the brief introduction, I guess. If anyone wants to, feel free to stop me anywhere. I'm either at the Foreman booth or anywhere. And I guess I could talk about this for ages. So before I leave, we're slowly running out of time, but as I promised, I have a couple of questions for you. And the first one, the biggest one probably, is pull mode for Ansible something that you would even want? So could I again get raise of hands? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Wow. Awesome, awesome. Thank you. The other thing I have is, or the second and the third question I have, I think, is about the things that currently don't work but could be made to work. First is about the roles use case, or if having Ansible just as a different syntax for shell, I guess, if that's good enough. So not good enough. Essential. Okay, that's good. Thank you. Good to know. How about the report callback? Yes. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. 5. Well, I got what I asked for, didn't I? Okay, so those were my questions. We have like 6 minutes left before I need to clear the stage. So based on what you hear, anything from you?
Say in the beginning it should theoretically
Yes.
Ansible, the stuff that Ansible does to the proxy, so the Yggdrasil only runs what Ansible wants to have run. Because then you don't need Ansible, not roles, not anything.
All right.
Just shell.
In theory, yes. Practically, I have no idea. I must come clean and say that, because I don't know. To be honest, I never wrote or even tried writing an Ansible connection plugin. So maybe.
Have you considered Ansible agent? It's deprecate.
Let me stop you right there.
Well, it's unmaintained.
Oh.
What's that? No, but it was there to solve this sort of issue. But have you considered it? Or do
To
you
be
know
honest,
about
I
it?
don't think I've heard about that. I've seen Ansible Pool, which sort of does something else than what we need. But good point, thank you. I'll check that out. Maybe I'll have something to talk about next year. Any?
Why should I use the full mode when I can create a host with Foreman, install it, and then call Ansible by myself?
Use case, actual use case. Management of installed devices that move networks where you are not allowed to SSH to. A laptop, for example, behind a VPN.
Okay.
Thank you. Then, as I think I said that in the talk, you can also use that to manage hosts which are not always online. But that's, again, most likely a laptop. Hopefully, yeah.
A cruise ship.
Cruise ship.
Shipping container.
Even auto-scaled instances where they're not necessarily always online.
Right.
The instances could exist but be shut down,
Mm.
and thus in a cloud environment
Right.
a lesser cost.
Okay, so if there are no other questions, I guess we can call it a day. Or not call it a day, sorry, there's yet another session coming up. So not call it a day, call it a talk, I guess. So thank you all for being here. And as I said, if you want to talk more, please do come talk to me at the booth or anywhere, or send me a message or anything. Thank you all.